He told her she was ruining his future, but 3 years later, that future stood in front of him in a snowy park, 2 little girls with his eyes and teddy bears in their hands. Nicholas Harper had been under pressure before, but nothing had ever cracked his composure the way Emily's quiet confession did. He stood in his corner office surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows and the glittering skyline he had clawed his way into, yet for the first time in years he felt trapped rather than triumphant. Emily Watson stood a few steps away from him, her pale blonde hair catching the afternoon light, her blue eyes wide and vulnerable in a way that made him want to look anywhere except at her face. She had come here with trembling hands, not to demand anything or manipulate him but simply to tell him the truth they both now had to face. And instead of listening, instead of breathing, instead of taking even 1 second to understand, he let fear sharpen his tongue into a weapon. "You're ruining my future," he snapped, the words cutting through the room with a finality he didn't intend but couldn't take back. As soon as they left his mouth, he felt something inside him twist violently, but he was too consumed by panic to stop. His palms were sweating, his heart hammered against his ribs with a sickening rhythm. His father's voice echoed through his mind, every insult, every warning, every reminder that emotions were weaknesses and families were chains meant to drag men down. He had spent years promising himself he would never repeat that cycle, and yet the moment Emily mentioned a baby, all he could hear was the sound of his father's scorn repeating through his skull. His fear didn't feel like fear, it felt like anger, and it lashed out at the only person who didn't deserve it. Emily stiffened but didn't cry, which made his stomach drop even further. She simply looked at him, long, slow, searching, as if she were examining someone she no longer recognized. Then her gaze dimmed with a kind of final understanding, the kind that comes after being pushed away too many times. Her fingers trembled as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture he knew meant she was trying to keep herself together. "I didn't come here to ruin anything," she said softly, her voice small but steady. "I came to tell you because you deserve to know." Her calmness only fueled the storm inside him. He couldn't hear her over the roar of his own fear. He paced away from her, rubbing the back of his neck, unable to stand still. His mind flooded with timelines, meetings, negotiations, numbers, everything he had spent years building, everything he had convinced himself depended on him staying unburdened and untethered. The image of himself as a father, of having someone rely on him in a way he had never been relied on, terrified him more than he could admit. He wasn't ready. He wasn't enough. He wasn't capable. And instead of confessing that truth, he hid behind cruelty. Emily watched him silently, her breath uneven. She had loved him once, maybe still did, but she understood something in this moment that he refused to see. She wasn't the one ruining his future, he was ruining his own present. When he still didn't look at her, she stepped toward the door, each movement slow and deliberate, as if she were afraid anything faster might break her resolve. He felt her pass him like a shift in temperature, her presence fading even before she reached the exit. "Emily," he said, but the word came too late and too hollow to bridge the distance between them. She turned her head slightly, just enough for him to see the glimmer of pain behind her calm expression. "Your future will be just fine, Nick," she said quietly. "And now I know I'm not meant to be part of it." Those words hit him harder than any accusation. She opened the door, stepped out, and let it close gently behind her. The soft click echoed through the office like a final heartbeat. Nicholas stood frozen in place, the weight of the moment settling like lead in his chest. His anger drained away, leaving only an aching hollow. He sank into his chair, burying his face in his hands as the reality of what he'd done sank deeper. He had pushed away the one person who had ever seen the good in him. He had destroyed something precious before it even had the chance to exist. And worst of all, he knew he had done it because he was terrified of becoming the very man he had spent his entire life escaping. He didn't chase her. He didn't apologize. He didn't take back the words that shattered her. Instead, he sat surrounded by every symbol of success he had ever chased, feeling like the poorest man alive. Only much later would he learn the truth, that in pushing her away, he hadn't just lost Emily, he had lost 2 little girls he would not meet for another 3 years. Emily left the city as quietly as she had entered Nicholas's life, carrying nothing but a duffel bag, a small savings account, and a heart that felt too bruised to beat properly. She did not look back at the skyline, did not allow herself to replay his words, did not give herself permission to wonder if he regretted them the moment she stepped onto the bus. The future she had imagined with him crumbled so completely that the only thing she could cling to was the instinct to protect the tiny life growing inside her. She traveled for hours until the city noise faded into trees and open roads, and eventually she stopped in a small winter town where no one knew her name, her past, or the man who had cast her out of his. She found a modest 1-bedroom apartment above an old bookstore and accepted a job at a cafe nearby, telling the kind, gray-haired owner only that she needed steady hours and wasn't afraid of hard work. Her pregnancy was far from easy. She dealt with nausea that left her breathless, doctor visits she could barely afford, and a loneliness that clung to her even in daylight. But she also felt the fluttering kicks for the first time, the gentle reminders that she was no longer alone, and with every passing month she spoke to her unborn baby in soothing whispers, promising them a life full of love even if that love had to be given by one person. She never told the baby about Nicholas, never allowed bitterness to seep into her voice, because she refused to let their first memories be shaped by the echo of a man's rejection. When labor came earlier than expected, it brought chaos with it. She arrived at the hospital frightened and exhausted, prepared for one child and one new life to begin, but fate had other plans. After a flurry of doctors, alarms, and hurried instructions, she heard the first cry, sharp and insistent, then seconds later a second cry, smaller but equally strong. 2 daughters. Twins. Emily lay trembling on the bed as nurses placed 2 tiny bundles against her chest. Chloe, the louder one, blinked up at her with a fierce, determined gaze. Cassie, quieter, nestled against her like she had already claimed her mother as her safe place. Both girls had brown hair as soft as feathers and deep brown eyes that made Emily's breath catch in her throat. They looked just like Nicholas. It hurt, but it also filled her with something unimaginably profound. These were her children, her entire world, and she vowed that they would never feel unwanted the way she had felt that day in his office. The first year blurred into survival. Emily worked every shift she could, strapping the girls into a stroller she'd bought at a thrift store, pacing the apartment floor at night until they fell asleep. Sometimes she fed them in the bathroom of the cafe during her break, whispering lullabies while customers chatted obliviously on the other side of the door. Money was tight enough that she counted every coin twice, but she never let the girls feel the desperation that lived beneath her determination. Her love softened the edges of every hardship. Chloe was bold and loud, the kind of baby who laughed just as often as she cried. Cassie was thoughtful and observant, always watching her mother with the solemn curiosity of someone far older than her months. They were different, yet inseparable, and they filled the tiny apartment with a warmth Emily had never known. As months turned into years, the town embraced them. The bookstore owner downstairs left children's books outside her door. The cafe customers brought small toys and knitted scarves for the girls. The librarian saved picture books for when the twins grew old enough to toddle through the aisles. Emily found herself building a quiet life surrounded by people who cared, even if they never knew the full story. She never spoke Nicholas's name. She never explained why her daughter's eyes were such an uncanny shade of brown. The past remained sealed away in her chest, locked behind old pain she refused to reopen. Chloe and Cassie flourished. By age 3 they could chatter endlessly about snowmen, teddy bears, and imaginary kingdoms. Their personalities blossomed into opposites that complemented each other perfectly, Chloe the explorer, Cassie the gentle shadow who thought before she acted. They followed Emily everywhere, clutching her hands, calling her mommy with unfiltered adoration. Their laughter soothed wounds she once thought would never heal, and slowly, gradually, Emily began to believe that perhaps this was her true future, not the one she once envisioned with Nicholas, but one she built with her own strength. Yet on quiet nights, when the girls slept curled together under matching blankets, Emily sometimes found herself staring at the ceiling with a heaviness she couldn't quite name. She wondered whether Nicholas ever thought back to the moment he dismissed her, whether he slept soundly in his penthouse or whether guilt ever clawed at him in the dark. She wondered if he had changed, if he was still running from the shadow of his father, if he was capable of regret. These thoughts never lingered long. She forced herself to push them away before they could take root. The past belonged to him. The future belonged to her and her daughters. Emily believed their lives would remain untouched by Nicholas Harper forever. She had built distance, carved a new beginning, and wrapped herself and her girls in a world far removed from the man who once shattered her. But fate had a strange way of circling back when least expected. She had no idea that the man who dismissed her as an obstacle 3 years ago was about to come face to face with the part of his future he never knew he needed, 2 little girls holding teddy bears, waiting to change his life in the most unforgettable way. The winter park was alive with gentle chaos the morning everything changed. Snow blanketed the ground in soft layers that muffled footsteps, children's laughter echoed from every direction, and the air smelled of pine and cold sweetness. Emily had bundled Chloe and Cassie into their warm coats, tied their matching scarves, and placed their beloved plush teddy bears into their small mittened hands before bringing them to the park for a rare day of rest. The girls adored winter. Chloe immediately ran toward the small skating pond, dragging her teddy by the arm, while Cassie stayed closer to Emily's side, methodically kicking at little piles of snow as if testing their texture. To Emily, these ordinary moments were jewels, quiet breaths of happiness she had fought hard to earn. She stood watching her daughters play, unaware of how the next few seconds would unravel the life she'd so carefully stitched together. She noticed a figure at the edge of her vision, tall and motionless, blending with the quiet of the morning. At first she paid little attention. Tourists often stopped to take photos of the snowy landscape. But something about this man felt strangely familiar. The tilt of his head, the way he stood with his hands deep in the pockets of a dark coat, the slight tension in his shoulders. A feeling began to creep up her spine, subtle but unmistakable. Then she heard his voice. Chloe. Cassie. The names were spoken barely above a whisper, yet they sliced through the winter air with surgical precision. Emily froze. It couldn't be. It wasn't possible. For 3 years she had lived in this town unnoticed by anyone from her former world. She forced her heartbeat to steady as she slowly turned, praying she was wrong. She wasn't. Nicholas Harper stood a few yards away, half-shrouded by drifting snowflakes. The sight of him felt like a blow to the chest. He looked older, though not in the way that years alone could explain. There was a heaviness in his brown eyes, a tension in the set of his jaw, as if life had been unkind when she wasn't watching. His hair was a little longer, his coat dusted with fresh snow, and for the first time since she'd known him, he didn't look polished. He looked undone. But all of this faded to the background the moment she realized where he was looking. Not at her. At the girls. Chloe had paused mid-step, her bright brown eyes fixed curiously on the stranger who spoke her name without ever meeting her. Cassie clutched her teddy bear tighter, inching instinctively closer to Emily. The twins, unaware of the storm gathering around them, simply stared back at the man whose gaze seemed glued to their faces, faces shaped from the very features he saw in the mirror. Emily felt the world shift beneath her feet. Her lungs tightened, and her palms grew cold inside her gloves. She wanted to move, to shield the girls, to scream at fate for being so cruel, but her body refused to respond. Nicholas took a slow step forward, unable to tear his gaze from the children as recognition flooded his expression. He didn't need to ask. The truth lived in every line of their faces, the brown hair, the deep eyes, the unmistakable resemblance that even a stranger would notice. Emily saw the moment realization crash through him, saw the breath leave his chest, saw his world fracture exactly the way hers had 3 years ago. "It's them," he murmured, barely audible, almost as if the words were dragged from him unwillingly. "Dear God, there." He couldn't finish. Emily finally found her voice, though it felt like scraping glass across her throat. "Don't," she said sharply. "Not here. Not in front of them." Nicholas flinched as though she had struck him, but her tone was enough to wake him from whatever trance he was in. He tore his eyes away from the girls and looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in years. His expression was a collision of shock, guilt, hope, devastation, and something else she couldn't bear to name. "Emily," he breathed, as if her name itself hurt. For a moment he couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't reconcile the woman standing before him with the one he'd last seen walking out of his office with quiet dignity and heartbreak he'd been too blind to notice. She looked stronger now, steadier, shaped by years of struggle and love he had not been there to give. A pang of regret twisted through him so violently that he almost bent with it. "How?" he asked finally, voice cracking. "How are they? How did I?" She lifted a hand quickly, stopping him from spiraling into questions he had no right to ask. "Not here," she repeated, softer this time. "Let them play." Nicholas looked back at the girls, who had resumed their games, Chloe twirling clumsily on one skate, Cassie carefully brushing snow off her teddy bear's nose. They had no idea that the man watching them so intensely was the same man who once rejected their existence. His chest constricted. For a moment he couldn't breathe at all. He saw in their expressions flashes of himself, the curiosity, the seriousness, the stubborn spark, and the weight of what he had missed hit him like a collapsing building. 3 years of first steps, first words, first laughs, first tears. Gone. Stolen by his own fear. He turned to Emily again, eyes raw. I didn't know." "You didn't want to know," she replied, her voice steady but filled with an old bruise he had placed there himself. He swayed barely perceptibly, as though the truth physically struck him. Snowflakes drifted around them in silent patterns, but the world between them felt anything but quiet. Emily wrestled with 1,000 emotions, fear, anger, sorrow, protectiveness, but most overpowering was the desperate need to keep her daughters safe from any pain Nicholas might bring into their lives. Yet even so, something inside her shifted. She saw a man breaking, not out of selfishness but out of a dawning awareness of what he had lost. For the first time, she understood that Nicholas hadn't walked away from his future, he'd never even realized what it would become. She inhaled shakily. "If you want to talk," she said at last, "we'll talk. But not now. Not until they're out of earshot." Nicholas nodded, unable to trust his voice. Emily turned toward the girls, her heart pounding. She forced herself to walk forward, step by steady step, aware that nothing, not her carefully built life, not her walls, not her resolve, would ever be the same again. Behind her, Nicholas watched the daughters he'd never known existed, and for the first time in his life, the future he'd once been so desperate to protect finally had a face. 2 small, brown-eyed faces holding teddy bears in the snow. Emily led Nicholas away from the skating pond and into a quiet, snow-dusted corner of the park, far enough that the girls' laughter turned into soft background music instead of a sharp reminder of everything he had missed. The cold air bit at her cheeks, but it helped steady her, gave her something physical to focus on instead of the chaos spinning inside her. She wrapped her arms around herself, not for warmth but as a barrier, a shield she had spent 3 years building. Nicholas walked beside her stiffly, his posture unsure in a way she had never seen. The confident, razor-sharp CEO who once commanded rooms with a single look now moved like a man who was afraid the ground beneath him might shatter. For a long moment neither spoke. Snowflakes drifted between them, settling in Emily's hair, melting against the wool of Nicholas's coat. He opened his mouth once, closed it again, dragged a shaky hand over his face as if he couldn't quite believe he was awake. Emily didn't rush him. She didn't owe him anything, not answers, not comfort, not kindness, and yet she remained, waiting, because part of her needed this confrontation as much as he did. Finally, Nicholas exhaled, the breath trembling out of him. "Emily. I didn't know." His voice cracked in a way she had never heard from him. "I swear to you, I didn't know." Her jaw tightened. "You didn't want to know." Her tone wasn't cruel, but it was unyielding, a truth sharpened by years of silence. He flinched, shoulders curling inward. "I was wrong. I was terrified. Angry. I didn't trust myself. I didn't trust anything. But I didn't understand what I was saying. I didn't understand what I was throwing away." Emily crossed her arms tighter, feeling a familiar heat rise behind her ribs. "You didn't have to understand everything, Nick. You just had to listen. Or at least not throw me out like I was an obstacle." "I didn't throw you out," he whispered, then winced instantly. "I mean, I did. I know I did. I just... God." He looked away, jaw clenching. "I was drowning in pressure, in expectations, in the fear that I would turn into my father. And when you told me, when you said you were pregnant..." He swallowed hard. It felt like the world caved in. Emily breathed slowly, grounding herself. "And so you told me I was ruining your future." The words hung between them like smoke. Nicholas closed his eyes, the memory visibly tearing through him. "I didn't mean it." "But you said it," she replied softly, painfully. "And I believed you." A long silence followed. Emily watched him, watched understanding carve deep lines into his expression, watched the weight of regret settle onto his shoulders like a second coat. She had imagined this moment many times, him learning the truth, him apologizing, him breaking under the realization, but the reality of it felt different. It wasn't satisfying. It wasn't triumphant. It was heartbreaking. Nicholas ran a hand through his dark hair, leaving it disheveled. 3 years, he murmured, voice shaking. "You've been alone for 3 years. With them. Our daughters. And I," he blinked rapidly, fighting the sting in his eyes, "I wasn't there. I didn't even know their names." Emily looked down at her boots, snow crunching softly beneath her. "You weren't supposed to know. I made sure of that." "But why?" His voice was desperate, almost pleading. "Why didn't you tell me? Even once?" Emily lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes fully for the first time since that day. The pain there had matured, deepened, aged into something stronger than anger. "Because you made it clear I was not part of your future," she said quietly. "And I refused to let my daughters feel unwanted. They deserved better than a father who had to be convinced to accept them." Nicholas staggered a step back as if the force of her words physically struck him. He turned away for a moment, gripping the back of a park bench like he needed it to steady himself. Emily watched him take deep breaths, watched the rise and fall of his shoulders, watched the man who had once been untouchable crumble beneath the truth. When he finally turned back to her, his brown eyes were glassy and raw. "Emily. I can't change what I said. I can't undo the past. But please, please don't shut me out of the future. I want to know them. I want to meet them properly. I want to be..." His voice broke. He swallowed hard. "I want to be their father." Emily's throat tightened. She had expected him to want answers, or explanations, or even forgiveness. But the vulnerability in his voice, quiet, fractured, real, struck her in a way she wasn't prepared for. She told herself not to soften, not to feel anything, not to let him in. Yet the truth was unavoidable. The girls had a father, and he was standing in front of her, desperate and remorseful and unmistakably changed. "They don't know who you are," she said finally, voice gentle but firm. "They don't know the story. They don't know what happened between us." Nicholas nodded. "I don't want to hurt them. Or confuse them. Tell me what to do. I'll follow your lead." Emily studied him carefully. The man before her wasn't the man who had once thrown her out of his office with a careless sentence. This Nicholas looked haunted by the ghost of all he had missed. And she realized, with a strange mix of sadness and relief, that he wasn't here to erase the past, he was here to face it. "We'll start slow," she said quietly. "Very slow." Nicholas let out a breath that shook with emotion, and for a moment Emily thought he might fall to his knees right there in the snow. Instead he nodded, unable to speak. From across the park, Chloe and Cassie called out to Emily, waving their teddy bears in triumph. Nicholas turned toward the sound, his entire face softening in awe. Emily watched him watching them, and something inside her shifted, not forgiveness, not trust, not love, but the faint beginning of possibility. A possibility she had sworn she'd never allow. But life, as she was learning once again, rarely cared about the promises she made to herself. Nicholas returned to the park the very next afternoon, though Emily hadn't promised him anything beyond slow. She half expected him not to come at all, believing that guilt might keep him away or insecurity might swallow him before he could show up. But at precisely the time she usually brought the girls to play, he appeared at the path's entrance, hands shoved deep into his coat pockets, shoulders tense, eyes scanning for Chloe and Cassie with a mixture of awe and terror. Emily watched him from a distance, wanting to read his intentions before allowing him near their daughters. When the girls spotted him, they didn't run to him the way they did to familiar faces, but they stared, fascinated and curious, drawn to him in a way that made Emily's chest ache. Children had instincts adults often lost, theirs seemed to tell them he was important. The first few days became a hesitant routine. Nicholas would linger near the benches, close enough to be visible but far enough not to intrude. He brought small, thoughtful things, tiny mittens he'd found in town, a bag of marshmallows to add to hot cocoa, a coloring book he thought they might enjoy. Emily didn't let him hand anything directly to the girls yet. Instead she took the items herself and passed them to the twins, watching his reaction carefully. He never complained, never asked for more, never rushed a single moment. He simply watched the girls as though every second he was allowed to be near them was a miracle he didn't deserve. Chloe was the first to bridge the gap. She wandered toward him one afternoon after proudly showing Emily a crooked snowman she had built. Chloe had always been bold, unafraid of strangers, drawn to anyone who smiled at her. She stopped in front of Nicholas and stared up at him with her wide brown eyes, her teddy bear dangling from one mittened hand. Nicholas froze as though he were afraid his very breath might scare her away. Then Chloe pointed at the stick-figure snowman and announced, in the loud, decisive voice only toddlers possessed, that it was missing a hat. Nicholas blinked, slow and startled, and then lowered himself to her height with a gentleness that surprised Emily. He glanced at her for permission, and when she gave a tiny nod, he unwrapped his scarf and placed it on the snowman's head. Chloe erupted into delighted laughter. Nicholas, for the first time in 3 years, felt something inside him crack open, not painfully, but in the way a frozen river cracks in spring, making room for movement again. Cassie took longer. She always hovered closer to Emily, observing quietly before deciding whom she could trust. But on a day when the wind was sharp and the snow glittered like powdered diamonds, Cassie fell while trying to climb a mound of ice. Before Emily even moved, Nicholas was already there, scooping the little girl gently into his arms. He didn't panic or smother her with questions, he simply held her, steady and warm, while she caught her breath. Cassie gripped the collar of his coat with her tiny fingers, looking up at him with cautious curiosity. And then she rested her small head against his shoulder. Nicholas nearly broke at the feeling of that fragile trust. Cassie didn't say a word, but the acceptance in her gesture was enough to undo whatever remained of his defenses. As days passed, the girls began to anticipate his arrival. When he approached, Chloe would wave both arms in the air, and Cassie's eyes would brighten in a shy but unmistakable welcome. Nicholas began learning the small but important things: how Chloe liked her mittens tucked inside her sleeves because she hated the cold, how Cassie preferred to sit quietly and build icy castles, how both girls needed their teddy bears to be placed just so before they played. He paid attention to every detail as if memorizing the world he had never allowed himself to be part of. Emily noticed. She also noticed the way he never overstepped, never tried to take control, never assumed a role he hadn't earned. One afternoon, as the sun hovered low and pink in the sky, Nicholas approached Emily with visible hesitation. The girls were busy rolling a huge snowball together, giggling each time it fell apart, and Emily's attention was mostly on them, until she sensed Nicholas gathering his courage beside her. His voice was quiet when he finally spoke, but each word carried a weight that made her heart clench. "Emily, I know I've lost any right to ask you for anything. But I need you to hear this." He paused, swallowing hard. "I want to be in their lives. Not out of guilt. Not because I feel obligated. But because I love them. I don't even know them fully yet, and I love them. I feel it every time I see them laugh. Every time Chloe calls out for someone to watch her. Every time Cassie takes my hand without saying a word. And I want to be worthy of that." Emily looked at him, surprised by the rawness in his voice. She had expected defensiveness or excuses or even desperate pleading, but not this quiet sincerity. Still, she couldn't ignore the past. "It's not just about loving them, Nick," she said softly. "It's about being consistent. Showing up. Not disappearing when things get hard." "I know," he replied. "And I'm terrified I'll mess up. But I'm more terrified of missing another day of their lives." Silence stretched between them, thick with old hurt and new hope. Emily's breath fogged the air, mingling with his, and for a moment she felt the weight of every choice she'd made since leaving him. She thought of the nights she cried alone. The mornings she whispered promises to her daughters. The strength she built from nothing. And she thought of Nicholas now, no longer the arrogant CEO who believed emotions were weaknesses, but a man stripped bare by regret and longing. "You're doing well so far," she said quietly. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't permission. It wasn't a commitment. But it was the first step he'd been praying for. Nicholas inhaled deeply, eyes shining with something that looked dangerously like gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, the words cracking slightly. He watched Chloe and Cassie tumble into a heap of snow, their laughter ringing across the frosty air. Emily followed his gaze, her heart twisting with both fear and possibility. She didn't know where this fragile rebuilding would lead. She didn't know if she could trust him fully again. But she did know that her daughters were beginning to love him, and that he, in return, was loving them with an intensity she had never expected. And that, whether she liked it or not, was changing everything. Nicholas's presence slowly shifted from an unexpected intrusion to a steady rhythm woven into the fabric of their days. Winter began to loosen its grip on the little town, and the snow that once glistened like crushed diamonds softened into heavy slush that gathered in the corners of the sidewalks. The twins no longer questioned why Nicholas appeared each afternoon, they simply accepted him with the open-hearted certainty only young children possessed. Chloe would drag him toward the playground as soon as she saw him, insisting he push her higher on the swings than Emily ever dared. Cassie, who was gentler and more cautious by nature, preferred to sit beside him on a bench, tracing patterns in the melting snow while she told him stories in her quiet, thoughtful voice. For Nicholas, these moments were both joy and punishment, because with every giggle, every tiny hand tugging at his sleeve, he felt the weight of the years he had lost pressing even deeper into his chest. Emily watched carefully, her guard never fully lowered, yet she couldn't deny the change happening before her eyes. Nicholas no longer seemed like the polished CEO she remembered, untouchable, composed, and relentlessly ambitious. He looked human now, shaped by mistakes he no longer tried to hide. When Chloe demanded that he crawl on the ground pretending to be a wolf, he dropped to his hands and knees without hesitation, ignoring the expensive coat he had once been too proud to wrinkle. When Cassie cried because her teddy bear got wet, he didn't panic. He simply removed his scarf and wrapped the bear inside it like a fragile treasure. Emily saw how the girls lit up around him, how they looked at him with a trust they didn't give easily, and she felt something inside her soften no matter how hard she tried to resist. One early spring afternoon, Emily brought the twins to a small cafe near the edge of town. She had promised them hot chocolate as a reward for helping her clean the apartment earlier, and the girls ran to their favorite table beside the window. To her surprise, Nicholas arrived moments later, breathless from jogging down the street, his hair windblown and his coat hanging open. He greeted the girls with a warmth that seemed instinctive now, but when he turned to Emily his expression shifted, almost shy, as if waiting to see whether she would allow him to stay. She nodded once, and the relief that flickered across his face was so palpable that she looked away before it could unravel her resolve. They sat together in a booth, the twins between them, each with a mug of cocoa topped with more whipped cream than Emily would usually allow. Chloe sipped hers so enthusiastically that she left a white mustache on her upper lip, and Nicholas chuckled softly as he wiped it away with a napkin. Cassie leaned against Nicholas's arm, carefully dipping her fingertip into the foam and licking it with quiet concentration. Emily watched the scene unfold with a tightness in her chest she didn't know how to name, part longing, part fear, part disbelief that this man, who once pushed her out of his life so easily, now treated their daughters with a tenderness that bordered on reverence. After the girls became absorbed in spreading marshmallows across the table like tiny snowballs, Nicholas cleared his throat. Emily's pulse picked up instantly. She recognized that sound, the way his voice tightened when he was building up to something difficult. He looked down at the table for a moment before lifting his gaze to her. "Emily, I've been thinking a lot," he began, speaking low enough that the girls wouldn't overhear. "About the past. About what I said. About who I was back then." His thumb brushed the edge of the napkin, a small nervous gesture she had never seen from him before. "I didn't just run from responsibility. I ran from you. From the only person who ever saw the parts of me I didn't show the world." Emily's stomach tightened. Conversations like this were dangerous for her. She didn't want to reopen wounds she had worked so hard to heal. But she owed him the chance to speak, at least this once. "Nick, we don't have to talk about." "Yes," he interrupted, gently but firmly. "We do. Because if I don't say it now, it will rot inside me." He inhaled shakily. "I was wrong. I know that sounds simple, maybe too simple for the damage I caused, but it's the truth. I let fear dictate everything. I told myself I wasn't ready to be a father, but the truth is, I didn't think I deserved to be one. I was so terrified of becoming my father that I became something worse, a man who abandoned his own children before they even took their first breath." Emily didn't speak. Her fingers curled around her mug, absorbing its warmth as her heart struggled with emotions she'd buried deep beneath layers of practicality and survival. Nicholas continued, his voice softer. "These last few weeks, being with them, seeing the way they laugh, the way they think, the way they look at the world. I see pieces of myself, but I also see pieces of you. And it kills me to know I missed everything, their first steps, their first words, their first birthdays. I wasn't there because I couldn't face the truth. And I'm so sorry, Emily." His apology wasn't dramatic or rehearsed. It wasn't wrapped in self-pity. It was raw, clumsy, and painfully sincere. And that made it harder to reject. Emily swallowed. "Sorry doesn't erase what happened." "I know." He nodded, accepting her words without argument. And I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect you to trust me overnight. But I want to try. I want to earn a place in their lives, and in yours, if you let me." Emily's breath caught. She wasn't ready for that. She didn't know if she ever would be. Her entire life had been reshaped by his absence, and she didn't know how to allow him into a world she built alone. But she also couldn't ignore the truth: he was showing up now. Not because he was forced to, not because anyone demanded it, but because he wanted to. Before she could respond, Chloe tugged on Nicholas's sleeve and proudly announced that she had built a marshmallow snowman. Cassie added that her bear was sleepy and full from watching them eat. Nicholas laughed, a sound so soft and genuine that Emily felt something inside her crack open a little more. As they gathered their things to leave the cafe, Nicholas held the door for them, his eyes lingering on the girls with a mixture of wonder and longing. Emily saw it again, that enormous, aching love he was finally allowing himself to feel. And despite her fear, despite her uncertainty, despite the scars she still carried, one undeniable truth settled gently into her chest. He was trying. With everything he had. And for the first time, she let herself wonder what it might mean if she stopped fighting the possibility of a future that involved him. Spring settled over the town with a softness that felt almost unreal after the long, grueling winter, and the park that once lay silent beneath layers of snow now buzzed with life. Families picnicked beneath budding trees, the air smelled faintly of damp earth and new blossoms, and the twins darted through the grass like two determined fireflies carrying their teddy bears as if the toys were part of them. Nicholas had become so woven into their days that even the townspeople began to recognize him as the tall man who always trailed after two little girls, bending to tie their shoelaces or lifting them onto the monkey bars as if he had been doing it all their lives. He arrived without fail every afternoon, sometimes dressed in tailored suits straight from meetings, other times in a hoodie and jeans that made him look younger, less like a CEO and more like a man rediscovering the world he had once ignored. Emily noticed changes in him that had nothing to do with appearance. He was patient in a way he had never been, listening intently to Chloe's winding stories and offering Cassie gentle encouragement instead of pushing her beyond what she could handle. He laughed more, smiled more, allowed himself to be silly, and even let the girls braid his hair with mismatched ribbons one afternoon, drawing delighted squeals from them and stunned amusement from Emily. Watching him with the girls felt like watching a closed flower slowly, cautiously bloom, and as much as she wanted to maintain distance, it was getting harder to pretend she felt nothing. The shift between them became more pronounced one mild evening when the sun dipped low behind the hills and the park emptied until only their small group remained. The twins were chasing fireflies near a patch of tall grass, their laughter ringing across the clearing, and Emily sat on a bench, watching them with a serenity she rarely allowed herself. Nicholas approached quietly, hands in his pockets, unsure whether he was allowed to sit beside her. When she didn't move away, he lowered himself onto the bench, leaving a polite space between them that somehow felt more intimate than closeness would have. For a moment they simply watched the girls. Then Nicholas exhaled, the sound long and heavy, as though he had been carrying a weight he could no longer hide. "Emily, I need to tell you something," he said, not looking at her yet. "And I know I've already asked too much of your patience, but this isn't something I can keep inside anymore." Emily's pulse quickened, though she kept her expression calm. She sensed something important, something dangerous, something she wasn't sure she was ready to hear but couldn't walk away from. Nicholas leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "Before you left, I convinced myself that choosing you, choosing a family, meant losing everything I had worked for. My father drilled that into me for years. He said love was a distraction, relationships were traps, and children." He swallowed, the word catching painfully in his throat. Children were burdens that would destroy a man's ambition. I hated him for saying it. But I believed him anyway, without even realizing it. Emily's breath hitched at the vulnerability in his voice. He had never opened himself this way, not even when they were together. Back then he had been all walls and steel and carefully constructed confidence. Now she could see the cracks, painful, human cracks that made him suddenly feel like a man she had never truly known. When you told me you were pregnant, he continued, every fear my father ever planted in me came roaring back. I wasn't angry at you. I was terrified of myself, terrified I'd fail you the way he failed everyone. Terrified I'd become him. He finally turned to look at her, and his eyes were filled with a mix of regret and honesty that twisted something inside her. So I ran. Not physically, but emotionally. I lashed out at you because I was too much of a coward to face what I felt. Emily looked down at her hands. Part of her wanted to cling to the anger she had nurtured for years, but another part, the softer, lonelier part, felt the edges of it begin to wear away. You didn't just lash out, she said quietly. You shattered me. You forced me to walk away because staying would have destroyed me. I know, Nicholas whispered, and his voice broke. And I can never repay you for what you endured alone. Every day I regret it. Every day I think about what I lost because of my own fear. But these last weeks with the girls, with you, I realized something. I wasn't afraid of becoming my father. I was afraid of becoming someone unworthy of you. Emily's heart jolted painfully, but she said nothing. Nicholas drew a slow breath. I love them, Emily. I love our daughters more than I thought I was capable of loving anything. Anne. His voice softened, trembling slightly. I never stopped loving you. Not once. Even when I told myself I had moved on, even when I convinced myself I'd made the right choice, something in me always felt wrong. And now I know why. Her eyes lifted to his, and the world seemed to narrow to the two of them, the past, the present, the tangled future hovering uncertainly between them. Nick. She began, but he shook his head gently. I'm not saying this to pressure you or expect anything back, he said. I know I haven't earned forgiveness. I know I haven't earned trust. All I'm asking is that you understand I'm not the same man you walked away from. I can't change the past, but I want, more than anything, to build something better in the future. For the girls. And, if you let me, for us. Emily's throat tightened. She wanted to deny him outright. She wanted to cling to the safety of the walls she had built. But she also couldn't ignore the truth in his voice, the sincerity that wasn't performative or rehearsed but lived deep in him now. She saw how the girls adored him. She saw how he cherished them. She saw how he looked at her as if she were something precious he was terrified to lose again. She drew a shaky breath. I'm scared, she admitted softly. You broke something in me that I'm not sure can ever fully mend. Nicholas's expression softened with something almost like reverence. Then let me help mend it. Slowly. Patiently. However long it takes. Emily didn't answer right away. Instead she watched her daughters, who were now dancing through the fading sunlight, their teddy bears bouncing in their arms. She thought of the nights she cried herself to sleep alone. She thought of the mornings she woke up with two little bodies pressed against her, giving her hope she didn't know she needed. She thought of Nicholas, his absence, and now his presence. Finally she looked at him again. We'll take this one step at a time. Nicholas's shoulders sagged with relief, and he nodded as if she had handed him the most priceless gift he had ever received. They didn't touch. They didn't move closer. But something shifted between them, quiet, fragile, real. A door long closed creaked open just an inch. And for the first time since the day she walked out of his life, Emily allowed herself to imagine a future in which Nicholas wasn't part of her pain, but part of her healing. Spring melted fully into early summer, and with it came a warmth that seemed to seep not only into the town but into the fragile places inside Emily that she'd kept cold and fortified for so long. The park was now a haven of brightness, thick green grass, blooming flowers, and the hum of people enjoying the gentler season. Chloe and Cassie spent their days racing between the playground and the pond, their teddy bears always tucked under their arms as if afraid of missing any adventure. Nicholas continued to show up without fail, and what had once been cautious interactions had grown into something effortless, natural, almost inevitable. He wasn't simply a visitor anymore. He had become part of their routine, part of their stability, part of the tiny world Emily built from the ashes of her heartbreak. As the girls grew more comfortable with Nicholas, they began weaving him into their daily rituals. They tugged him toward ice cream stands, demanded he sit beside them during story time, and insisted he join every game as if he had never been absent from their lives. Every new milestone the girls shared with him, every laugh, every hug, every whispered secret, only deepened the ache of all the moments he had missed, but it also ignited something inside him. He was no longer a man hovering at the edge of their story. He was learning how to belong. Emily, however, was still cautious. Not because she doubted his devotion to the girls, but because trusting him with her heart again meant risking everything she had built. She watched him closely, observed how he responded to frustration, exhaustion, unpredictability, the things that tested parents every day. And every time he met those challenges with patience, humor, or humility, a small, reluctant piece of her resistance softened. The real turning point came on the day of the town's annual summer fair. The event transformed the main park into a tapestry of colorful booths, games, lanterns, and music. Chloe and Cassie were ecstatic from the moment they woke, barely able to stay still long enough for Emily to brush their hair and tie their dresses. They clutched their teddy bears as if bringing old friends to their first festival. When Nicholas arrived to join them, he was greeted with squeals and tiny hands pulling at his sleeves, and Emily couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her chest at the sight. They spent hours wandering through the fair, Nicholas carrying Cassie on his shoulders while Chloe led them from booth to booth with fearless enthusiasm. He bought them cotton candy so large it swallowed half their faces when they tried to eat it. He let them drag him onto the small carousel, where the girls insisted he ride one of the horses instead of standing beside them like a normal adult. Emily watched him laugh, really laugh, and it struck her with startling clarity how different he was now from the man she once knew. He wasn't polished or distant or guarded. He was open, present, vulnerable in a way she never thought possible. As sunset approached, lanterns flickered to life across the fairgrounds, casting everything in a soft, golden glow. The twins grew tired but refused to admit it, their energy flickering like the lanterns overhead. Nicholas offered to carry them, one in each arm, and the sight of him walking through the crowd with both girls nestled against him hit Emily with a wave of emotion she wasn't prepared for. He looked whole. As if a part of him that had been missing for years had finally returned home. Later, when the fireworks began, they settled on a blanket near the lake. The twins sat between them, leaning sleepily against their parents. Chloe pointed excitedly at the sky each time a burst of color erupted, while Cassie clutched her teddy bear with one hand and Nicholas's sleeve with the other. Emily felt herself breathe deeply for the first time in a long while, soothed by the warmth of the moment. When the girls finally succumbed to exhaustion and drifted asleep on the blanket, the world seemed to grow quieter around them. Only the lake, the crackling fireworks, and the weight of everything unsaid remained. Nicholas turned to Emily, uncertainty flickering across his features as though he was afraid to break the peace. Emily didn't move away. She didn't pull the walls back up. She simply watched him with an openness she had been fighting for months. "Emily," Nicholas began, keeping his voice low so as not to wake the girls, "there's something I want to say. And I want to say it now because I've learned that waiting for the perfect moment only leads to regret." Emily's heart tightened, but she didn't interrupt him. He continued, each word heavy with truth. "You gave our daughters everything. You gave them a life full of love, safety, laughter, and you did it alone. I can never repay what you sacrificed. And I know I can't erase the hurt I caused you. But these past weeks, they've changed me. Being with them has changed me. Being near you has changed me. I didn't understand what love really meant back then, but I do now." Emily swallowed, emotions rising in her throat like a tide. "I love them," he said softly, looking at the sleeping girls with awe. "I love them more than I ever thought I was capable of loving anything." Then he turned his gaze back to Emily. "And I love you. I think I always did. I just didn't know how to be the man you needed." The words lingered between them like suspended light, warm and shaking the air. Emily felt herself tremble. She had prepared for 1,000 possibilities, but not for this quiet, steady confession under lantern light, with their daughters asleep between them. Every wound he created, every lonely night she endured, every moment she rebuilt her life alone, all of it warred with the tenderness blossoming inside her now. She closed her eyes briefly, grounding herself before speaking. "Nick. I don't know if I'm ready to open that door again. Not completely. You hurt me more deeply than I thought anyone could." He nodded, accepting her words without argument, but his voice remained steady. "I know. And I'm not asking you to love me back. I'm asking for time. For a chance to prove that I'm not the man who let fear dictate everything anymore." Emily looked at him for a long moment. Really looked. And then, slowly, she reached across the blanket and placed her hand over his. His breath caught, though she only touched him lightly, as if testing whether the world would break if she closed that distance. "It's not a promise," she whispered. "But it's a beginning." His hand tightened around hers, gentle and grateful. Above them, fireworks burst into shimmering gold, illuminating the sky like scattered stars. Chloe and Cassie slept peacefully between them, unaware that something monumental had just shifted in the space their parents shared. And for the first time since she walked out of Nicholas's life, Emily let herself believe that healing, true healing, might be possible. Not because time demanded it, or circumstance pushed it, but because the man beside her wasn't running anymore. He was choosing her. Choosing their daughters. Choosing a future he once feared. And she, finally, was brave enough to consider choosing him back.